And once again, I have to call Donald's attention. See what happens? I pick on people I know, on friends. If you were a stranger, I would have just been polite. Okay. Welcome to the afternoon session. I'm going to hand this off and let Jack introduce the panel, but I need to give Jack a little bit of a hard time as well. Jack goes back in ICWA probably as far as I do, maybe even a year or two more. We have the same hairstyle, obviously, but Jack comes to us from Casey Family Programs by way of the Association on Indian Affairs. They did the original work that justified ICWA's passage, documenting how often kids were out of home for various states. And that really, when that report went into the reform report, Policy Review Commission report, that was issued, and then the following year, ICWA was adopted with a handful of votes opposing that. So Jack is really one of the, not quite godfather, he's not quite the Bert Hirsch level godfather, but he has been in this a long time. He's invested. He's the person I go to when I have a 4E question. I mean, he has a number of different pockets of knowledge that are valuable, that are essential. But most of all, I'm proud to call him my friend. So I'm going to turn this over to Jack.
Thank you, Bill. That's one of the best introductions I've ever received. So I appreciate that. And I will say, I also admire the goatee, which I don't have. So, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jack Trope. I am currently a senior director in the Indian Child Welfare Program at Casey Family Programs, located, and we're based in Denver. So it's good to be here with all of you. As Bill said, in addition to the ICWA work, I do 4E and Family First work, which is why I am moderating this panel, I presume. So with that, I'm just going to say a few introductory remarks about Family First. And I should say before I say that, by the way, Judge Bill Thorne is one of the people I really look up to in this field as well. And every time I listen to him talk about ICWA, it's inspiring. It's inspiring to the people who listen to him. I steal shamelessly from things that he says when I do my own presentation. So I do want to do that shout out. Okay, so Family First. So I think at this point, hopefully most of you know what Family First is, but in case you don't, let's start from the beginning, right? We have the Title 4E program, and historically the Title 4E program has funded foster care and adoption assistance and associated administrative and training costs with that. It was later expanded to guardianship. But the trigger for 4E for 40 years, almost 40 years, was removal of a child from the child's parents, right? And so for a long time, a lot of us in the field, and it's an entitlement program, right? Unlike grant programs, it's an entitlement program. You spend the money and you qualify, you get money back, just like Social Security. And so for many years, the criticism was, why do we have an entitlement program that only kicks in when children are being removed? We need to expand this entitlement program to provide funding to keep children at home. And so that was what Family First was intended to do, was to add to Title 4E as an entitlement funding for to keep children at home. Now, it's a very technical program. as are all federal programs, as we know. But let me just sort of give you the highlights of what it is, and then I will turn it over to this excellent panel. So in order to qualify for Family First Services, a child needs to be at imminent risk of foster care, which is defined either by the state or if it's a tribe that gets direct funding, by the tribe. And it's not based on income eligibility, it's based on risk of being placed in foster care. In general, the law covers evidence-based programs. There is a clearinghouse that reviews programs to determine if there's sufficient evidence to put them on this list of approved programs. The programs fall in 3 categories: mental health, substance abuse prevention, and in-home parenting skill programs. The match under this program is at 50% until October 2026. It then goes up to the FMAP, which, by the way, for most tribes is 83%. There are 2 ways for tribes to access this program. One is through a Title IV-E agreement with the state. If a tribe accesses it through a 4-E agreement, they would have that same limitation around evidence-based programming, which does not take into account the kind of cultural programs that many tribes, most tribes, provide to either provide or would like to provide to their families. But there are some programs that tribes run that are on the list, and a few of them are Family Spirit, Healthy Families America, Home Builders, Motivational Interviewing, Safe Care, Cognitive Behavioral Therapy. Those are all evidence-based programs that I'm aware of that at least some tribes across the country are running. And so those are the types of programs that if you had a 4-year agreement with the state, and of course the state has to have an approved Family First plan, and only about 1/3 of the states do, and that folks from California can talk about California. But those are the types of programs you'd be able to access through an agreement potentially. If you're a direct funded tribe, and in California there's 1 tribe approved for direct funding, and that's Talawa. There, in addition, you can also get reimbursement for culturally based programming. And so that's an advantage of being direct funded. However, there are only 17 tribes across the nation that have been approved, only about 8 to 10 that are implementing, and only 2 Family First tribal plans have been approved so far. So it's been a slow process, and it's been slow for states too, by the way. And so, but of course, Family First sets the floor. States can go way beyond Family First in terms of thinking about prevention programs. And when states put together their Family First plans, ideally, it should be part of a broader, comprehensive plan that addresses prevention services. And so my understanding, from what I've been told, because I don't have firsthand knowledge of what's happened here, but I understand that the state of California has moved beyond the federal law and has developed its own program with us that includes state funding in order to address prevention services. And so that is what the focus of this panel will be. And so let me introduce to you the panelists. I am not going to read their bios, but I will just tell you their names and titles, and they can introduce themselves as they present. So to my left is Cheryl Treadwell. She's the Chief Safety, Prevention, and Early Intervention. She's the Chief of the Safety, Prevention, and Early Intervention Branch at CDSS. Next to her is Kelly Winston, Chief of Child Welfare Policy and Program Development Bureau at CDSS. To her left is Hillary Konrad, the Bureau Chief for the Office of Child Abuse Prevention in CDSS. And then to her left, as a substitute on the panel, is someone I think probably everyone in this room knows at this point, and that's Delia Sharp, the Executive Director of the California Tribal Families Coalition, who's filling in for Karen Kolb, who could not be here because of some family matters. So with that, I'm going to pass this down to Cheryl, and they can let you know about what's going on in California.
Thank you, Jack. Well, good afternoon. Good seeing everyone. You look beautiful. I love seeing faces. Some faces here are new to me. Some are familiar. As he said, I'm Cheryl Treadwell with CDSS. We have a long title now in my new branch, Safety, Prevention, and Early Intervention Branch, which is, for me, I've been with the department 20 years. For me, this is a very important part of the work to be on the front end of the system. I think this is very exciting, having an opportunity to once do what we think is the spirit of what ICWA is all about, is keeping families together and preventing removals of families, of children from their families on the front end of our system. So I am very grateful to be here, and I don't take this opportunity lightly at all. So I'm here with my management team, Hillary, Konrad, and Kelly, both working on this prevention activity. They're leads for this work, and so it's very important to us as a team to be able to be here today to present some of the aspects that we think you need to know about this work. So our intention here today is just to get some of the provide to you some of the highlights of the program that we think are relevant to you to hear today. And many of you have some familiarity, and thank you, Jack, for providing that context for the aspects of the federal legislation, and we'll be highlighting more or less about the state program. Go to the next slide, please. And you can go to the next one. Okay, so what's our vision for California? It's an integrated, we want to provide an integrated statewide system that supports families to provide safe, stable, nurturing relationships and environments for their children. The key words for me are supports for all families. We have a real opportunity here to work with tribes to allow them to be able to be involved in the cases involving their tribal member children in accordance with ICWA, including doing the provision of prevention services, the voluntary cases, the family making cases, the cases that are on the front end of the system. That is where the heavy lift to me of FFPSA, the federal law, and the state law is significant. The other key words are safe, stable, and nurturing environments. Tribes know their communities. They know what's important for their families. It's an opportunity to create those kinds of environments where you live, work, and play in your communities. That's an opportunity to lift up those areas as well. And then the idea that we're trying to move from a system that's not as siloed as it's been over the years, the opportunity to engage more with the communities, especially the communities that are impacted by the child welfare system. And we know that in our system, foster care system, that Indian children are disproportionately represented in the system. It's another opportunity through this prevention program to once again avoid the separation of families and reduce that disproportionality. Next slide, please. So this slide is basically to give you a visual of how the components work together. We know that our state program, we didn't get real ingenious and creative to rename it. It just contains the same names as the Families First Prevention Services Act. But as you can see here, this visual just illustrates that there was, since the passage of FFPSA, California committed to shift our focus from the protection of children to be more comprehensive. So we created a Families First Prevention Services program. So in this slide, you see we have the 5-year prevention plan that we submitted back in September. We're working on our second revisions now for that plan. Then we codified the federal law into what we call Assembly Bill 153. That became our state program. But we went beyond that, and as we created our our state plan, our plan also allows counties to opt into the program. Our plan goes further. It's more comprehensive. It requires a more comprehensive look at the entire aspect of prevention and not just the narrow aspects of what FFPSA has limited to EVPs only, but it combined that plus more. What's not on this slide is that our state legislature made significant investments by setting aside $199 million for block grant money to be used for comprehensive prevention planning. And we have 2 of our 4E tribes also that received allocations from that money to build infrastructure for their local prevention planning. So federal law, state prevention program, now we have a state block grant program equals our state program. Families First Prevention Services Program, and maybe we should have a contest to rename it so that folks will not get confused that our program is bigger and better than what the feds offered. Next slide, please. So this slide just sort of distinguishes the difference between what the federal act offered, and Jack sort of highlighted that we had to opt into the program. We as I said, we're working on our revisions and submissions. There's the other parts of FFPSA as mentioned here when it talked about expecting and parenting teens. There's other aspects to FFPSA that we didn't list here, and I think a lot of times part 1 and part 4 sometimes get confused. We are the part 1 people, so I just want to make that distinction between the 2 parts. But under our state program, as I said, we have state funds. They can be used to support any target population, not just what's in the federal candidacy listing that we put into our state plan. You can use the state funds toward any direct service activity to develop the continuum for the prevention services. And as we said, it's not restricted to just the 10 EVPs that we have listed in our federal prevention plan. So there's opportunity to use the state funds to fund other services, maybe some of the more supported or promising practices or opportunities there that could be used to support those types of services. So and once again, like even though our intent in the federal prevention plan that we have, I think we are very expansive with our candidacy pool, but if there are populations that we've missed, there's opportunities probably to have those kinds of discussions with tribes in terms of, what targeted communities that they want to include in their plan, or in collaboration in conversation with counties. So my team's going to talk a little bit more about those details and what it looks like and pretty much what we're thinking as a state when we talk about comprehensive prevention planning. So I'll pass it to Kelly.
Okay, thank you, Cheryl. So I'm Kelly Winston. Actually, the title of my bureau is inaccurate. We've had a reorganization week recently, and it's more aptly titled Family-Centered Safety and Support. And again, it reflects that kind of front-end early response to help families and prevent them from entering the system. And so I call that out because I think that that distinction is really, it fits very well with the work that we're doing today. So next slide, please. Thank you. So I'm here to talk a little bit about some of the little elements on that, that lovely addition slide that we looked at just a minute ago. So the California 5-year prevention plan is something that Cheryl talked about. It's under development and something that we're working on so that we can obtain federal approval to opt into the Title 4E elements of this program. As Jack mentioned, Title 4E, this is the first time that we've been able to draw down those funds to serve not just children at imminent risk of foster care, but their family members as well. And so we really want to leverage this program as much as possible. In the prevention plan, we have a number of elements you see on that slide that we're trying to cover to make sure that we meet the federal requirements so that we can really pass along this opportunity, not only to counties where you all as tribal representatives and members can participate in the development of those local plans, but also to those tribes who have a 4E agreement with the state. So it's really that taking advantage of these opportunities. And then as Cheryl mentioned, we also go beyond that and we provide opportunities with our state block grant to provide additional funds that are not covered under this program. So I always try to call that out to make sure folks are aware that what you see here relevant to the Title IV-E services is just a piece of the puzzle. And then there's lots more where that came from in California. So again, what does this mean for tribes? So for California, we're in the middle of developing our prevention plan, but we're also in the middle of providing guidance to counties about how they will develop their own prevention plans. And so it's important for you all to know that while they're in the development of their process, it's very similar to what they're doing or what we're doing here at the state level. And we want to encourage you all to get involved in those planning processes at the local level. You may want to reach out to counties to advocate for services that you want to see implemented in their local plans. And you really want to be taking that opportunity to leverage, any existing programs that they have available, what you want to see expanded to ensure that there are culturally responsive or specific programs to meet the needs of your members. So it's a good opportunity and good timing to be doing those things. For those tribes who have a 4E agreement, we're working on tailoring our approach to meet the needs of those two tribes. Currently in California, that's Yurok and Karuk. And so we've been in conversations with them as well about how they can develop their own prevention services program. In terms of the plan, you can see all the elements on here. Cheryl talked a lot about the vision. These are specific aspects of the plan that you can take a look at. It's been out for stakeholder review recently. We're in the process of taking in all of that feedback and trying to incorporate the suggestions made both by our stakeholders at large and then also through our tribal consultation process, have received lots of feedback from tribes so that we can ensure that their input is incorporated into the plan. Next slide, please. So this slide takes a look at the federal 4E requirements for the candidates of foster care. So as a requirement of the prevention plan, states have to plan for the determination of who actually will be included in that candidate population. And the feds just say, you have to be at imminent risk for foster care, but they've also encouraged us to think more broadly about that pool of individuals who would be eligible for services. We tried to make it as expansive as possible, but while still maintaining that concept of imminent risk for foster care. And so there are lots of families potentially able to be served through the Title IV program. And again, I always like to highlight that in addition, this means that we can draw down 4E funding for family members, which was not previously possible. And then the federal law also allows for pregnant and parenting youth in foster care to receive services. They don't have to be a candidate or at imminent risk, and they're already in foster care, but they also can benefit from these programs. Next slide, please. So this slide shows all of the services that we've included in the state plan on that right-hand side. Because this is the first time we're going to get to utilize those 4E funds. We wanted to make sure that we could take advantage of as many of the programs as possible, but we also wanted to do it in such a way that we didn't set up a program that counties couldn't sustain over time. So right now we have, at the time that we wrote our first draft of the plan, there were 10 well-supported EVPs in the federal clearinghouse, and we included all of those in the plan. In our state statute, there's built in the option for us to review the plan on an annual basis once it's been approved, and we can think about what changes we would need to make in terms of the services in that plan. And as services become more available in the clearinghouse, we can potentially add those to the plan over time. Some of the programs that some of you may be familiar with in the clearinghouse that are considered culturally specific are programs like Family Spirit or Sacred Journey, I think, is also included and has been reviewed, but they haven't quite reached that EBP standard necessarily that is included in our plan. So we're looking for ways in which we can support programs such as that to be either elevated into the clearinghouse, or if you notice at the bottom of the slide, it talks a little bit about the block grant funding and how the block grant funding can still go beyond what is required by the federal law and provide some of those services or others that don't meet that threshold of the Title 40 prevention program. Okay, and then this slide talks a little bit about our all county letter that describes the block grant. So you can see quite a bit of money was allocated over 3 years. Counties and tribes with 4E agreements have 199 million that they can use to develop and implement their comprehensive prevention plans. The letter specifically talks about what's allowable under Title 4E drawdown versus what's allowable under the state program and the flexibility that the state block grant provides. There is a list of requirements for the comprehensive prevention plan that is included in the letter. The letter specifically calls out the requirement that counties need to be consulting with their tribal partners in development in the plan and really do an analysis of the needs of the community so that they're meeting the needs as they develop those programs. Just one little kind of federal caveat there is that there's this thing called a maintenance of effort. All of that just means that we have to maintain previous levels of spending on those types of evidence-based program, something that you may hear about. And then it also talks about due dates and technical assistance for the program. The due dates for the comprehensive prevention plan to be turned into CDSS are currently scheduled for January 31st of 2023. So between now and then, this is the best time to really be talking with them about what the needs of your tribe are and what you would like to see included in the plan. And until then, we'll be providing lots of technical assistance to counties, to prevention planning teams, to tribes, and really trying to help facilitate the development of the best possible plan that counties can put into place. Okay, and I'm going to pass it over to Hillary. She's going to talk a bit more about the prevention plan.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Hillary Konrad, the Bureau Chief for the Office of Child Abuse Prevention. And I'm going to kind of explain what a comprehensive prevention plan is. We just heard that term mentioned a few times. Could you, next slide, please? So on this slide, you'll see in the middle, it says Family First Prevention Services Program. And we talked about how the state is going beyond what the federal limitations are of the law by asking counties to develop a comprehensive prevention plan. And how do you start implementing a Family First Prevention Services Program and develop a comprehensive prevention plan? And what is that? Well, a comprehensive prevention plan includes prevention services and strategies at all levels of prevention, those levels being primary, secondary, and tertiary. In primary prevention are services and strategies that are geared towards the general audience. Secondary prevention are services and strategies geared to populations that we would consider at risk. And then tertiary is for children that child maltreatment has already occurred and we're trying to prevent that reoccurrence. This comprehensive prevention plan will be for 3 years. And in order to receive the state block grant letter, the block grant funds, you'll have to develop this comprehensive prevention plan. Next slide, please. Cheryl talked about the importance of breaking down silos. And one way that we're trying to make that happen is through developing the comprehensive prevention plan and the planning process, including cross-sector partners. And those cross-sector partners are government agencies, as well as community-based organizations and tribal representation, and then also tribal and social service agencies. So on the left side of the slide, you'll see those that are the required partners that are mentioned in the guidance, which is the block grant letter that I mentioned earlier. And then you have our recommended partners, which are on the right side. And we've made sure to highlight the importance of our Title IV-E agencies, making sure that they engage with their tribes. Next slide, please. This slide is a depiction of the governance structure, and it uses existing bodies and processes and builds the Family First Prevention Services Program governance within that. You can see that tribes are woven throughout the governance structure in green. It is intended to allow decision-making to follow existing processes and to provide flexibility at the local level so that they can determine the best way to ensure that there's that cross-sector collaboration while still requiring and ensuring that tribes are engaged in the process. This structure helps us set standards, review data for standards of performance, and creates a process to make adjustments when improvements are identified and changes need to be made. This also creates feedback loops and incorporates feedback and suggestions. You'll notice that the top part of the slide is the state level governance, and then the bottom part of the slide is what we're expecting to see at the local level. Next slide, please. This slide shows the activities that are supported specifically by those Title IV-E funds. And we talked about that those are the well-supported EBPs that are listed in the California State Prevention Plan. These programs are typically used as the tertiary prevention services and usually provided after a child welfare agency has become involved or after maltreatment has already occurred. On the right, Kelly there was already a slide that has this, but this lists the EBPs again. And we just want to note that the plan can be amended and an annual review process is required in statute so that this list of services could change in the future. Next slide, please. Okay, so we talked about how we're going beyond the federal limitations by having this comprehensive prevention plan and this planning process that includes cross-sector collaborative partners. Well, it also allows for that funding where we can provide services beyond just the 4E. So those services can be for primary and secondary services that meet the local needs. They can also be focused on the cultural diverse needs of the community. And it also goes beyond the EBPs that are listed in the California Prevention Plan. So this is the opportunity, once again, for us to be able to bring in tribal voice and make sure that we're meeting your needs so we can provide services for your children. Next slide, please. And this slide is just another way for us to emphasize that the 4E dollars are going to those tertiary services, and that's the federal law and the limitations of that. But with our comprehensive prevention plan and the enactment of the state block grant, you can now provide services across the entire continuum. Next slide, please. And this final slide is showing the counties that have opted in to the Family First Prevention Services Program. There's 49 counties. And if you live in one of these counties, we encourage you to reach out to your child welfare agency to become involved in the comprehensive prevention planning process happening in your county. Next slide, please. And finally, if you're not sure about who to contact, please email our FFPSA Prevention Services mailbox, and we'll be able to give you that information so you can start participating in the planning process. And I'm going to pass it to Delia.
Thank you. That was a lot of information. Thank you all very much. Whew. FFPSA, right? Wow. So I have to ask, by show of hands, prior to coming to this panel, how many people had heard of FFPSA? And how many people knew what it stood for? And how many people feel like you understand it? Yeah, I'm with you. Like, kinda, we're getting there. Okay. Okay. Next question, also by show of hands. For how many people does prevention planning seem like a great idea? Right? Yeah, it's a great idea. It's super necessary, super important that it's funded. I want you to keep that in mind as I share my points, because it is important. And I do think that folks at CDSS are doing a really good job, both at taking a really complex federal statute and implementing it into state law and trying to identify those points of flexibility to ensure that tribes have access to the services that tribes need for their families. And so I want to preface all of that because I'm going to share kind of the advocacy points from California Tribal Families Coalition, the things that we have some concern about, and the pieces where we're hoping we can shift a little bit. But also, just before we get there, want to point out that prevention-based services have been a requirement under the Indian Child Welfare Act since 1978, right? It has always been under ICWA, right, the gold standard of child welfare, a requirement that active effort services are provided to prevent the breakup of the family. So what FFPSA is largely doing is finally funding that requirement. So, right, so let's kind of keep, that's at least the way that I view FFPSA, and I try to ensure that I don't get kind of sucked down into the rabbit hole there, right? It's the funding source. And what we don't want to do is take a step backward from where we are currently with regard to ICWA compliance in the state of California, so that, we allow the funding to, take that step backward. That's not where we want to be, right? Okay, so primary concern number one. California Tribal Families Coalition back in 2018 incorporated the Bureau of Indian Affairs regulations into California law. One of the requirements that now exists in California law is that counties have to conduct inquiry, right, determine whether the child is an Indian child at the hotline level. And then immediately they're supposed to notice the tribe, right? That is super important because that allows that early partnership between tribes and counties that we have really come to believe is the way to prevent the breakup of the Indian family, right? One of the concerns that we're having in the existing prevention plan, and appreciate all that's being done to try to creatively think around this. This is not necessarily a point of contention. It's a point where I think that we need to brainstorm together. But within the current prevention plan, there's an opportunity for community-based organizations to contract with the state to provide the prevention services. There is no requirement built into those contracts that those entities are conducting inquiry, much less providing notice to tribes, right? So we have prevention-based services now being provided to families, but not necessarily ensuring that those families, which may be tribal families, that there's no mechanism to ensure that that connection is happening with the tribe. And we actually believe that in many cases that won't happen. So we need to dial in some mechanisms by which we're essentially creating a fail-safe there. One of the easy ways would be to ensure that actually in the contract language itself, that those community-based organizations have an obligation to conduct the inquiry and notice. That's a kind of an easy approach. And then there's a lot of training that has to go beyond that. Because boy, you and I all know, right? We have done training for days. We have built-in core training for county social workers, and what happens? We have turnover, right? And then you have to start all over again. So now we have to train county social workers and the folks at the organizations, which is, it's a challenge, but not a challenge that we should step away from, right? We do hard things all the time. We can 100% make this happen, and we need more prevention-based services out there, which leads me to point number two. The prevention plan really should include all allowable cultural adaptations. Currently, we don't see any culturally specific services being included, and we need to come together to change that. And again, a challenge, but one that I think that we need to overcome very, very quickly, particularly as we heard Dr. Madrigal speak as the keynote speaker yesterday, right? And really emphasizing the need to not step away from what works to essentially move toward what's funded, right? The evidence-based. So let's, continue to keep her words in mind as we think about FFPSA. We're not going to take a step backward from ICWA compliance and what we know works in order to achieve funding. The third thing, and we're hoping that this is actually fairly easy, is that we'd like to see the prevention plan include guidance on how tribal agencies can enter into contracts either directly with counties or with the state to access funding so that services can be provided directly by the tribe. Super important, right? But not necessarily seeing it in there. We have heard and really appreciate the conversation around utilizing state block grants. But ultimately, you know, the kind of key takeaways, because as you all know, I am not Karen Cole, but I'm trying to stand in her very big shoes. But the key takeaways that we were hoping to have shared through this panel were that tribes should be included in county prevention planning, and there should be dollars in block grants to pay for services outside of those that are considered, quote, evidence-based, and that those funds should prioritize those children who are most overrepresented in the child welfare system, tribal children, right? So with those takeaways, sincerely hope that as tribal representatives have questions about FFPSA, that you continue to work with us to try to digest information, come back to the state and work together to try to achieve those goals. I want to thank the Office of Tribal Affairs for the extremely heavy lift and working with us to understand and trying to overcome a lot of these challenges.
All right, thank you to all the panelists. I'd like to give Cheryl, Kelly, or Hillary an opportunity if you'd like to address any of Dania's comments. This is be the opportunity.
No, I think we share common interest in trying to come up with the best way to attend to some of the suggestions that Delia mentioned, specifically around encouraging counties to include a lot of those areas that she suggested in their planning. We want to know. So, you know, we're here to try to provide that level of TA to our counties. And when we look at the plans, we'll be reviewing and scanning for those kinds of things in terms of where their engagement is. And engagement is a loose term that's used a lot. We want meaningful and effective engagement. I think that's important. So that is certainly an area that we are trying to, you know, make sure that we have the right folks on board to provide that TA, and certainly working with our Office of Tribal Affairs. They've been very helpful with us in giving us that guidance. And then, you know, the technical issues around the requirement of the spirit of ICWA, I think that is true. And it just gets complicated in terms of what's the best mechanism. And we're open to guidance and discussion about how to make that happen. And I always say, if you had to design a prevention system the way that you think it should be designed, design it first, and then let's figure out how to make it work. Because a lot of times we try to pigeonhole things in, but design your ideal system of what prevention looks like, and let's figure out how we can make that work. And so I would like to see it roll back even further before it gets to the hotline. So if you had to do that kind of work, how can we do it in this space and make it easy for each of the counties and for the communities as well? So I don't know if others have any.
Okay, so I want to open it up to the floor now for questions. Yes, comment. So for the folks who are online, I think I can summarize that very easily, and that is the tribes want to be able to provide culturally appropriate services to their communities and to get the funding to do that, and to work with the state to get that kind of funding to support those programs. Okay. Any other comments or questions? Yes, over here. Sure. Well, we have someone who's going to bring a mic to you so the online people can hear.
So I was just wondering, who are the two tribes who've submitted plans and what services did they have in their plan? And what were any cultural adaptations that they were able to put into their plans that might be of interest to folks here?
Okay, so I will partially answer that. I wish I had the plans in front of me. The two tribes that were approved were the East, has so far been the Eastern Band of Cherokees in North Carolina and the Salt River Pima Maricopa community in Arizona. Both of the plans have had a mix of evidence-based programs and culturally adapted programs. I'm not sure I can totally do justice to the culturally adapted programs. I think that at least one of the tribes, as I recall, had their own version of positive Indian parenting, which they had made into a local, locally based version of that. And I think that was one of the plans and that one of the tribes submitted. But I can't really summarize them specifically. But I think the interesting thing is that they were a mix of some evidence-based programs that they ran, and then culturally adapted programs that they ran. So it was both. And I would say that one of the things, the Children's Bureau gets a lot of criticism from a lot of places, often deserved, but I think one of the things the Children's Bureau has done very well is develop the criteria for reviewing culturally adapted programs. And I think that in those tribal submissions, they did not try to second guess, those programs. They have some very criteria that are very focused on the community and community standards and all of that. And so far they've implemented it in accordance with that. So I think even as states like California and others might be trying to fund culturally adapted programming, they might look at some of those criteria because I think they work pretty well. They've actually were adapted from a program out of Oregon that funds, it's a evidence-based health program, but they also fund cultural programs under that program. And so I would, I think there are models out there for state funding of tribal cultural programs.
Develop the table based on the state prevention plans that we'll put in the conference material.
Okay, for the folks online, CTFC is ahead of the curve as always, and they have developed some materials that are relevant to this that will be posted in the conference materials. Any other questions? I know this is such an easy program that you all understand it totally, so you couldn't possibly have a question about it. Yes, in the back there. Maybe we can have somebody bring you the microphone so the folks online can hear.
I was just kind of following up on a brief conversation we had with you here. My question was for Title IV-E about parents having legal representation covered, because I know that's been a hurdle for our tribe in implementing our Title IV-E program.
Well, it's interesting. I had brought you the question and answer out of the manual that where the policy was recently changed that allows 4E to cover costs of parent attorneys and child attorneys. So I can provide that to you afterward. Other questions? I'll ask a question then. You mentioned that there were 49 counties that had opted in. So the question is, can additional counties opt in, or is the time passed for that to happen?
So
Here, we need a,
49 counties have opted in, but that was really
here.
access their state block grant funds.
Okay, so I'm going to repeat myself. So 49 counties have already let us know that they have the intent to opt in. So I didn't go into a lot of detail, but they had the opportunity to give us a letter that would let us know that they were in the process of developing their comprehensive prevention plan. And for those counties who did not provide a letter, they can still submit a comprehensive prevention plan by January 31st. Of next year and still participate in the program. So it's not too late. They just may not have had a need for those early access to funds. There are other funds that were available for counties to do some prevention planning. The Family First Transition Act provided some funds. So counties may be accessing those and may still submit a plan.
Again, any questions? Another opportunity over here. Somebody taking charge out there. Appreciate that.
I'm just thinking on behalf of tribes, hearing that date, it's likely, I would assume, tribes are properly pondering, then what is the guidance or what does that look like for those counties to reach out to the tribes, or if tribes want to be a part of that plan? What can you share right here with the tribes about that? Is there an expectation for the counties to do that, or?
Are you asking about the ones who haven't submitted yet?
Both.
So if they've already submitted.
Yeah, if they already submitted, then how do they get?
Donald, if you want to continue to get exercise, you can run this back up to our panel here.
So I think the question is there any additional plans to provide guidance to counties around how to engage with tribes if they have not yet submitted a plan? And if they have submitted a plan, will there be, or what am I saying? Counties. I'm a little tired, sorry. Yeah, and then if they've already submitted, is there any additional questions that may be asked if it's clear that there hasn't been any tribal input in the plan?
So part of it, we could make part of that as part of our TA that we're providing to counties as we begin to roll that out. We can make sure that that's integrated in that effort. And then, of course, we like to write letters, but I mean, if there's more letter writing to do that, I mean, whatever we need to do to communicate, because we're working on our communication strategy now. And so we can make sure that there's some diligent effort in communicating that to the counties as well, and open to any other suggestions about how we can improve and make that communication strategy stronger.
And Cheryl, it's Angie.
Yeah.
I just wanted to reiterate, no county has submitted a comprehensive prevention plan yet. The only
Yeah,
thing they've
that's
done
true.
is submit an intention to submit a comprehensive prevention plan. And as Kelly said, that gave them access to some early dollars to start doing that prevention planning, but no comprehensive plans,
That's coming.
prevention plans have been submitted. And there is an obligation, both in the All County letter that went out and in the statute, I believe, that says that they will be working with their tribes. Thank you for nodding so emphatically, so that proving that I do know the statute sometimes, that they do consult with the tribes in developing those comprehensive prevention plans. And so that work should be underway. And Cheryl and her team have been doing an extraordinary job of TA with the counties and help to develop those plans. And I know that the tribal communities are front and center as they're doing that work as well. So I just wanted to clarify that the ship has not sailed in terms of those prevention.
Okay, so I've been told, Okay, I've been told there is a question online, and that is, will there be a time limit on prevention services? Will there be a time limit on prevention services?
The block grant is only 3 years. Sorry, you guys.
Oh, go.
Go, Cheryl. Cheryl's like,
So if it's about the prevention services that are going to be delivered, I'm sure there's some time limitations, but I'm not aware of what they are at this point. I'm not sure there are. It would be driven to whatever the case plan or the, whatever's needs are. It's needs driven. So it'd be based on that plan, I would think. So those are one of the areas that we still will need to know. And then as far as the whole prevention services block grant money, that reason why we're so a little bit driven behind the timelines, because that money has spending limitations. The block grant money has to be spent by 2024. Yeah, and so that's one reason why we're trying to get counties to get going in this work. And, it's our hope that we'll be able to extend it, but at this point, that's the timelines we're sort of restricted to at this point.
So we have about 3 minutes left. So are there any other questions or comments? Just to sort of follow up on what you just said, though. So then is it currently the funding will be available to the counties through 2024? Now, whereas the Family First funding is indefinite, right? That is an entitlement program, just like 4E, just like Social Security, like other entitlement programs. So the programs that are funded through there will continue. Nothing is forever, but to the extent anything is forever in federal statutes, the Family First statute should remain in place. And the reimbursement rates will increase in 2026, and so that's something that is increase in funding on the federal side. Any other? So one last question I have about the funding flow. So the funding would go to the counties, and so if tribes were to get, say, a contract, it would be with the county as opposed to the state. That's how it would work? Right, not 4E tribes, but the state block grant money. Okay. All right. Well, with that, I know we've got breakout sessions that start at 2:30, and so you have 36 seconds to get to your breakout session.
Thank you to the panel. I wanted to take a moment of personal privilege to ask you to keep in your hearts and your prayers Silvana Osuna, who is one of the original ICWA warriors. She's in the hospital. She's doing better. They took tubes out, so she's breathing on her own and she's communicating. But she started in ICWA as soon as ICWA was passed here in San Diego County. So if you all will keep her in your thoughts and prayers, I know she and her family would appreciate that. So, and there'll be 3 breakout groups, and then there'll be a second set of breakout groups, and then we'll come back here for closing at 5, and there's a special event as part of the closing. So if you can make it, please join us. I understand that everybody likes to try and beat traffic, so do what's best for you. And thank you to the panel again.